China and the Philippines continue to clash in the South China Sea. China's official media, CGTN, released a video on June 2nd showing the Philippines on May 19th airdropping supplies to the BRP Sierra Madre, a military vessel that is grounded at Second Thomas Shoal. The Chinese report said that when the Chinese Marine Police responded, they found at least 2 officers on board the ship, moving around on the deck with guns and pointing their hands and guns at China Coast Guard officers. On this basis, the Chinese report argued that the Philippines had violated the international order. The report asserted China's indisputable sovereignty over the Second Thomas Shoal and its adjacent waters. Second Thomas Shoal, or Genai Reef in Chinese terms, lies within the UN-approved Philippine Exclusive Economic Zone, or EEZ, and it's believed that China's actions violate the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. In 2016, an international tribunal ruled that Second Thomas Shoal is located less than 370 kilometers from Palawan province and therefore part of the Philippines' EEZ. China, which has declared sovereignty claims over 90% of the South China Sea, has refused to recognize the arbitration result. In 1999, an old Philippine landing ship, the Sierra Madre, ran aground on the Second Thomas Shoal and hasn't been towed away. The ship is currently guarded by 7 Philippine Marines. The Philippines supplies it through air delivery and also reinforces the stranded warship. Sometimes Filipino civil society groups join in sending supplies. Chinese Coast Guard vessels and Chinese warships frequently cruise in relevant waters, trying to put tremendous pressure on the Philippine garrison. Entering 2024, conflicts between China and the Philippines have become increasingly frequent. Just in late March 2024, a Chinese Coast Guard ship used water cannons to attack a Philippine ship heading to Second Thomas Shoal, injuring 3 Filipino crew members. Earlier that month, the Chinese Coast Guard was accused of a water cannon attack that left 4 Filipino crew members injured by broken glass. The Chinese like to employ an intimidation tactic. One time, a Chinese Coast Guard ship passed by the bow of a Philippine supply ship just a few meters away, and the supply ship's radar system turned red, issuing a collision danger warning. Philippine officials are concerned that China will quickly occupy Second Thomas Shoal as the ship breaks up. It's a reef that is rich in fish and is also a gateway to an area believed to hold large deposits of oil and natural gas. That would also mean China could push into the Philippines' Palawan province, where the US was granted access to a new military base in 2023. The video, released by China on June 2, 2024, showed that this time the Chinese Coast Guard ship remained quiet and didn't take any aggressive actions. From another perspective, this also shows that the Philippine government is increasingly tough on the CCP. In the South China Sea conflict between China and the Philippines, if a Filipino loses his or her life, that would almost certainly cross a red line and would be very close to what the Philippines defines as an act of war. This was the stern warning issued by Philippine President Marcos Jr. to the CCP on May 31, 2024. That was when Marcos Jr. was invited to deliver a keynote speech at the Shangri-La Dialogue in Singapore. He encountered provocative questions from the Chinese military wolf warrior Major General Xu Hui. The two exchanged heated words over the South China Sea.
Our efforts stand in stark contrast to assertive actions that aim to propagate excessive and baseless claims through force, intimidation, and deception. In the West Philippine Sea, we are on the front lines of efforts to assert the integrity of the UNCLOS as a constitution of the oceans. We have defined our territory and maritime zones in a manner befitting a responsible and law-abiding member of the international community. We have submitted our assertions to rigorous legal scrutiny by the world's leading jurists. So the lines that we draw in our waters are not derived from just our imagination, but from international law.
Xu Hui's question was whether the death of a Filipino sailor by a Chinese Coast Guard water cannon would mean that a red line had been crossed, and under what circumstances the Philippines would invoke the U.S.-Philippines Mutual Defense Treaty. The president replied that if a Filipino were killed by a deliberate act, it would raise the level of the Philippines' response and would be very, very close to what we define as an act of war. I believe our treaty partners hold the same standard, he added. We've had incidents of injuries, but thank God we haven't gotten to the point where any of the participants, civilians or others, have been killed, Marcos Jr. said. But once we hit that point, meaning if fatality occurs, we will definitely break the line. Is that a red line? It will almost certainly be a red line, he said. Before this question, the Chinese Major General asked this question.
President, in the eyes of the international community, some of your Philippines' behavior in recent times, it now sounds like you really consider other parties' comfort level, and there is a risk of ruining the regional long-earned, long-lasting peace since the end of the colonialist history. What's your comments on that? Thank you very much.
Marcos Jr. responded that the Philippines remains committed to the various principles of the ASEAN group. He then reiterated the Philippines' commitment to ASEAN centrality, one of the core elements of Philippine foreign policy. The term ASEAN centrality is regarded as a political term without a clear explanation. The CCP usually interprets this to mean that other Asian countries must act as strategic middlemen and must not get closer to any of Beijing's major power rivals. Marcos Jr. responded to Xu Wei's question and said, "I can't guess what you were referring to. If what you are referring to or implying is that the Philippines is somehow tearing up our consensus on Asian centrality, the answer is exactly the opposite." Marcos Jr. continued, "If you listen carefully to what I have just said, you will see that we are focusing on exactly the Asian centrality and the principles on which ASEAN was founded when it was born. It includes the idea of Asian centrality, which is something that we must use as a guide." He added, "And I think, also, as I said, many of these things we don't want to talk about today, but we have to. I would even go so far as to say that there is no longer a regional issue. We have to involve all parties in the discussion because it's not just the Asian member states that are the stakeholders now. And it's easy to see that, in fact, the whole world has become a stakeholder in the peace and stability of our region." Xu Wei's question echoed official Communist Party propaganda on tensions in the South China Sea. It has accused the Philippines of causing trouble in the South China Sea, as well as accusing it of following the dictates of its treaty ally, the US. Almost every neighboring country around China has been accused of the same thing by the CCP, and the complaints are almost identical. The Shangri-La Dialogue is considered the premier defense summit because of its format, allowing delegates to interact more directly and intimately. It has been a venue for frank and sometimes heated exchanges between the Asia-Pacific region's top defense and security officials.
We cannot afford any other future for the South China Sea other than the one envisioned by ASEAN, that of a sea of peace, stability, and prosperity. Unfortunately, this vision remains for now a distant reality. Illegal, coercive, aggressive, and deceptive actions continue to violate our sovereignty, sovereign rights, and jurisdictions. Attempts to apply domestic laws and regulations beyond one's territory and jurisdiction violate international law, exacerbate tensions, and undermine regional peace and security.
Marcos Jr. stated that the Philippines is defending the integrity of the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea as the Constitution for the oceans. The Philippines has defined its territory and maritime zones in a manner befitting a responsible and law-abiding member of the international community. As president, I have made this solemn commitment from my first day in office, and I have no intention of yielding. Filipinos will not yield. Tensions between China and the Philippines have risen over the past year or so, and the Philippines has shown its fortitude in defending its rights and claim in the West Philippine Sea, including parts of the South China Sea, including the Philippines' exclusive economic zone. The Philippine foreign minister has called relations between the two countries fluctuating, while the Chinese foreign minister has threatened that they are at a crossroads. On May 10th, the Philippines National Security Council advisor Eduardo Ano called for Chinese diplomats to be expelled for what it called a malicious disinformation campaign. It is in relation to an alleged leak of a phone conversation with a Filipino admiral. He said it has violated local laws and diplomatic protocol amid escalating disputes between the two countries over the South China Sea. Ano was referring to a news report that a call between a Chinese diplomat and a Philippine admiral discussing the South China Sea dispute was leaked. A transcript of the call published in the story showed that the Philippine admiral agreed to make concessions to China in January this year. According to the Manila Times, the admiral agreed to China's new model proposal, in which the Philippines would use fewer ships to resupply Marines on board warships that run aground in the disputed Second Thomas Shoal, and notify Beijing of the mission in advance. On May 8th, the Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson said that the facts are clear, well documented, and undeniable, adding that the Philippine side insists on denying these objective facts and intends to mislead the international community. The expulsion of the diplomats will undoubtedly aggravate the South China Sea dispute between the Philippines and China. The escalating conflict between China and the Philippines has prompted Marcos Jr. to move closer to the U.S. The peculiarity of the increasingly tense exchanges between China and the Philippines is that it could lead to a serious incident that would prompt the Philippines to invoke the U.S.-Philippines Mutual Defense Treaty with the U.S., thus turning the China-Philippines conflict into a broader one. The U.S. is the country that the CCP hates the most and therefore has become a frequent target of criticism by Chinese diplomats. With respect to the South China Sea issue, Minister Dong Juin pointed out that at present the Philippines has been going back on its words and making provocations on Zhenai Zhao and other issues, which is closely related to the incitement and support of external forces. In particular, the U.S. took the opportunity of military exercises to deploy intermediate-range missiles in the Philippines, posing a substantial threat to the regional security. China is firmly opposed to this. We have stayed committed to resolving differences through equal consultations on the basis of adhering to commitments, but will never tolerate actions that escalate provocations recklessly. Former U.S. Indo-Pacific Command Commander John Aquilino told the U.S. House Armed Services Committee in March 2023 that Chinese military provocations increase the risk of conflict in and around the Philippines. He said the Philippines, a longtime military ally and treaty ally of the U.S., could conveniently invoke the U.S.-Philippines Mutual Defense Treaty if any Chinese communist attacks on Philippine official vessels and aircraft in the South China Sea resulted in fatalities. For the CCP, the factors that could trigger a war in the future are first Taiwan and second the Philippines. The Philippines is becoming increasingly assertive. As an internationally recognized sovereign state, the Philippines is more of a headache for Beijing than the Taiwan government. During the confrontation between the US and China, Southeast Asian countries have become the focus of competition for influence. As the situation in the South China Sea escalates, the Philippines not only steers towards the US-Japan alliance in terms of security, but also in economic terms. This should affect the attitude of the entire Southeast Asia towards the Belt and Road Initiative, and these countries may have to give up their neutrality and make choices in the future. At the trilateral summit between the US, Japan, and the Philippines in April 2024, the leaders of the three countries announced the establishment of the Luzon Economic Corridor. This is the latest measure by the US and Japan to offset the CCP's influence in the Indo-Pacific. A joint statement from the three countries and a statement from the White House both pointed out that the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation, DFC, under the federal government plans to open an office in Manila. The U.S. and the Philippines are also strengthening cooperation in semiconductors and critical minerals. The U.S. Trade and Development Administration, USTDA, is providing funding to a Philippine nickel mining company that mines minerals that are key elements in the supply chain for batteries and energy storage systems. In addition, Facebook parent company Meta, geothermal energy developer Greenfire Energy, express delivery company UPS, and American geostationary satellite communications company Astranis are all preparing or will invest in the Philippines. The Luzon Corridor is where Japan and the US use their industrial and technological advantages to provide help to the Philippines, as well as cooperation with orders, loans, and personal training. For the Philippines, it's a great opportunity to improve its industrial structure. The US has previously proposed the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, but it hasn't been implemented much. This cooperation will give Southeast Asian countries a sort of reference and will make them feel that the US wants to spend resources on this area. The US may share risks through cooperation with other countries, such as joining forces with Japan, South Korea, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand to invest together to reduce the burden. The significance of the Belt and Road Initiative lies in the fact that over the past 3 decades, the US has neglected the development of infrastructure in the region, allowing the CCP's Belt and Road program to take advantage of the situation. Now the US and its allies are waking up to the situation. In October 2023, the Belt and Road suffered a major setback in the Philippines when the country terminated 3 railroad construction projects with the CCP. Those projects were initiated by the previous administration and were planned to be financed and built by the CCP. Previously, the Philippines had engaged with China primarily for economic purposes. After the last Duterte administration came to power, it put forward the Build, Build, Build program and pushed the Belt and Road project. However, more and more Filipinos are now skeptical of China as an economic partner and have suspended many large-scale Belt and Road projects. The biggest strategic goal of the Belt and Road is to create its own production chain and market. It's, in essence, a form of neocolonialism, that is, treating poor countries as colonies and controlling their markets. We believe that the Philippines has an exemplary role to play. If the Philippines sets an example and succeeds, Southeast Asian countries such as Malaysia and Indonesia may follow suit and gradually push the CCP out of Southeast Asia. Nikkei Asia reported that in 2023, about 50% of the CCP's regional investment went to Southeast Asia, with Indonesia being the largest single recipient, receiving about $7.3 billion. This compares to a 100% drop in the Philippines, Mongolia, Myanmar, Papua New Guinea, Tajikistan, and Turkey, with no new investments or construction projects. The main reason is political and economic risks. In other words, the intensification of conflicts in the region has directly affected the relations between the countries surrounding the South China Sea and East China Sea and Beijing. The Luzon Corridor approach may be more attractive to the Philippines, Malaysia, Indonesia, and Vietnam because they also have border and coastal issues with Beijing. For Southeast Asia, the Philippines, Malaysia, and Indonesia will be the targets for the US and Japan to win over in the future. But whether it will achieve results depends on the outcome of the tug-of-war with Beijing.